Nobody likes people who are controlling. The whole idea that any adult person is not a free, autonomous being is oppression. If you're being controlled, that oppresses every part of your life, including your spirit. Sometimes we all have to put up with controlling people because we have no one else to support us, or we need the money, or most often because trauma trained us to put up with it. But when you grew up with trauma, there can also be a tendency to be controlling. Maybe because you grew up feeling that things were so out of control that it's now like a reflex to hold people down, to make them predictable, to make them safe. But that doesn't work, and it's not a good thing either. Now, big obvious forms of control are one thing, but I want to talk about the more subtle forms that control takes. You may not even know you're doing it, or you may not realize that it's being done to you. But if you are doing it, I guarantee you it's hardening your heart against the very thing that you seek, which is the feeling that you're loved and safe. So how do we do this? The first way is a subtle form of control that I call outsourcing responsibility. So when you tell people that they have to stop triggering you, you are outsourcing responsibility for your own healing. Now, let's say you get offended easily. Ask yourself if you are expecting the people close to you to remember how sensitive you are about something that isn't healed in you yet. That's not crazy. That might be necessary for you. Maybe you make rules about what they can say or who can be invited to events or what food they can eat around you. It veers very easily from protecting you from direct harm to trying to control them so that you don't have to deal with your trigger. That's what you're doing. Instead of healing yourself and learning to have boundaries, you're making someone else responsible for you to be okay. If you're doing that, if you feel that you are making excessive rules for people or trying to influence what they say or whether they trigger you, maybe pull back on that. Take that control back into yourself and learn to calm your own triggers. When you do this, you set other people free to be themselves. Now, if you're not okay with who they are when they're themselves, you maybe don't want to be around them or have them in your life. Or maybe you have good reasons to control them, like because they're your child and they're underage, or they're a volatile person and they're getting violent, or you're at risk of harm around them because of the way they're driving. But for people you do want in your life, set them free to be themselves. They are more likely to feel great in your presence when that pressure is off of them. This is good for connection. It's good for forming a close and mutually respectful and trusting relationship. The second controlling behavior that's subtle that I want to talk about is what I call concern shaming. And this is a form of control where people are directing little subtle criticisms at you and expressing their doubts about how capable you are, about the decisions you're making, about your actions, but they won't tell you directly. So they say, "I'm only raising my concern about this," and then they criticize what you eat, what you do, where you work, where you're not working. You know the type. They say, "Oh, I'm only raising this because I'm concerned about you." So for a parent to talk to a teenager that way might be appropriate, but for adult peers, it's not appropriate to do that. And it's a form of shaming, and it's passive aggressive. It's also controlling, and it's trying to influence another person to do what you think they need to do to be the vision of them that you were hoping that you had in a friend. But they are who they are. Believing that you know how another person should live their life is, by definition, a form of arrogance. And when people get that energy of arrogance off of you, it pushes them away. So a good way to be with people that you want in your life is to sit back and admire them and listen to them and support them without trying to influence or change how they live their life, what they believe, what they say. You can talk to people, that's fine. But, if you say it once and you're not getting a reaction of like, "Oh, that's interesting, tell me more about your opinion," to keep going is pressure. It's trying to make somebody in your own image. If they ask for your advice, in that case, give them your advice, but be gentler than you think you need to be. A third form of subtle control is when you avoid plans and schedules or you delay decisions on plans that affect other people. So everybody's saying, all right, we're all going to take this trip. Let's buy our airline tickets. And then you keep saying, well, I can't decide on the day. And you're just not dealing with it. Nobody can book their flights. Everybody's going to end up paying more. The whole plan can't be planned. Nobody can get the right day because you're delaying. That is a form of control. Now, you might be doing it thinking, oh, I'm a free spirit. I just want to do what I want. But preventing other people from counting on you to say yes or no to a group plan when that's what they need so that they can get on with their lives, that's control. We all have friends who do that. They say, let's get together this weekend. And you reply right away, great, when is good for you? And then you don't hear back for days. And you're forced to decide, at what point do I stop holding the weekend for this person who asked and, seek something else to do? At what point do I do that? There's something similar when people flirt with you and they are not available for a relationship and they're like, hey, we should really have coffee sometime. I call it bookmarking. So they just sort of like put a little thing there so that you have trouble moving on from that. You think something's coming, but it's not. So this is like social bookmarking where you make plans with people, you tell them you want to have a plan, but you won't pin it down. And then flaking out is a really common form of control. So what it really means is that person wants the option of seeing you unless something better comes along. So it's not a good way to treat people. And if you do that, be clear and definite about plans, or clear and definite that you can't make a plan. Sometimes people with complex PTSD have a hard time with calendars and schedules and remembering things. It's because of dysregulation. And I acknowledge that. But if you're on the receiving end, it ends up controlling your time. So it's understandable that it would push people away. It's disappointing for them, and it's disrespectful of their time. Now, we all know what it feels like when people do that to us. So even though it could be something that's driven by your trauma, it's something that's well worth working on to demonstrate integrity and consideration of other people. You will never be sorry that you leave people with that feeling about the way you treat them. So more specifically, what I call controlling with time. This could be where you cause people to wait all the time by being late for things, like 45 minutes late all the time. I knew somebody, it was like clockwork, 45 minutes late. Actually, honestly, I used to be that person. Or being the person who demands that other people be on the dot or there's going to be hell to pay. If you're their peer, it's not really your place to direct rage and control at people. If you don't like their habits around time, that's another discussion to have about your boundaries, which are not just things you say, but things that you do. You can stop being friends if you're unhappy with how they do time. After you ask them if they don't change, you don't have to keep going, but it's disrespectful and unkind to berate people for being the way they are. It's just about choice. They might be controlling you, right? But they can't control you if you don't participate, if you set a boundary. When people let you down, leave without them or end the friendship. But the controlling aspect of expecting people to meet your demands is one of those things that pushes people away, and it doesn't work. It doesn't lead to satisfaction and closeness. Another controlling behavior is controlling people with your mood. Everybody has to be quiet. Don't talk to me about your day because I had a bad day. They're making you pay an emotional penalty for hurting them in the past, maybe. That's another way they do it. But not communicating directly about it and not allowing you any pathway toward resolving it. If you've ever had this done to you, you know it feels so oppressive to your spirit. People don't like it. And it eventually will erode others' spirits and push them away from you. So another form of control is controlling with expectations. You're disappointed when people are not like you imagine them to be, which is usually coincidentally not how they are. There's like this idea you have of them, and then there's how they are. And there can be a big disconnect to them. It takes such a long time to really get to know somebody and have what you believe them to be match a little closer to who they are. But I've heard it said by wise people, you can never really do that. So you're always sort of discovering who this person is. I had a friend a few years ago, probably more than that now, like 5 years, and I had to end the friendship, and they were critical. They started acting weird, and then they had these criticisms, but they wouldn't tell me what the criticisms were. And they said, you just really disappoint me. And I was like, okay. And I'm, if you have expectations here, then and I'm here, I'm very disappointing. And I read this thing. It was later. It wasn't in the moment. In the moment, it just ended up being this unworkable conversation because it wasn't really anything I did that they could express. They just were like, they just felt critical and let down. And they just said, I just really looked up to you. And I think it had something to do with, I was going through a hard time. And that's why they were like, I really looked up to you. And I wasn't who they thought. And I was in tears about something one time. And then, they were just angry at me. They were angry at me for being sad about something that was actually quite sad. And I just realized after years of thinking I had been this great friend, and I think I had been a great friend, I did not get treated as a great friend over something, that I couldn't, over just being myself. And that's not what a friend is. A friend is somebody who's interested in getting to know you, who more or less accepts you as you are. We all have to say things to friends sometimes and say, hey, you really let me down. But at least you say what it is if you're going to say harsh things, right? Just like, what is it? What is the problem? It's not the best interest. And so I read this thing later. I think I saw it on like social media, and somebody said, I'm sorry that who I actually am is not who you thought I was. I'm sure that was very disappointing for you. And that's what I would have said, except I totally cut contact with this person. There was just so much yuck there. It was very painful. And several videos have been made about the demise of this friendship that I had thought was a good friendship. It was very painful for me. So I remember when this happened, I just felt very controlled. I felt controlled by expectations, that I was sort of like being emotionally punished for not meeting some expectation that was never stated and never promised and not realistic. And I felt controlled by that. And for me, at this stage of my healing, like I would never want to feel controlled if I can possibly help it. Like sometimes I feel controlled by forces beyond my help. I was at the DMV the other day, and I was, I had to play the game and stand in line and follow along and get treated kind of rudely. And that whole game, it wasn't too bad. I felt controlled, but it's just something I trade in my freedom for that period of time because I need my driver's license renewed. But controlling friends are not good friends. Good friends encourage and bless all your efforts to be the best person you can. They don't attack you for not being who they thought you were. They care about who you are. And often when people project on others, it's a trauma thing. That's often the consequence of rushing into relationships or idealizing people, or it can be part of that narcissistic pattern of idealizing and then devaluing people, right? Another form of control is controlling with silence, giving the silent treatment and refusing to discuss something, walking out or ignoring when somebody is talking to you. That's a particularly aggressive kind of control. It's very hurtful to other people. And there are almost no situations where it's a good idea to do that. If you really need to not be in contact with somebody, you can remove yourself. And if you need to discuss something with somebody, it's time to show up for that conversation. If you feel it's not safe or a good time to have that discussion, you can say that and say, I need to take a break until I feel a little calmer inside, or until we're not angry at each other, or until we have some privacy. So showing up and being direct about that is a non-controlling way of setting that boundary, not being silent. Now, it's so natural to want to change people. And if you grew up with CPTSD, you're often going to have in your life other people who have issues with trauma or self-defeating behaviors. It's going to just mess things up for you. It's going to be painful. And this could be stuff like people who have problems with money or anger or drinking. And that is all real. And it might be hard to deal with, but it's easy to slip into a negative kind of controlling behavior when you become too attached to your idea of how that person is supposed to be and then try to force them to be that. Forcing becomes really toxic for you and for them. So this is a much deeper subject. But if you find yourself having an idea that with somebody who you care about, they would be so much better if they would just do, whatever it is you have in mind, it's a signal that you're abandoning yourself and not facing reality of how things are. How things are is your prompt to make a choice. Do I want to be here? In our minds, it feels like forcing people to be the way we want is going to make us happy. But even if we're trying to make them do something that is obviously a good idea, and even if they comply, it still won't satisfy us because deep down we know that the change has to be from them. The good thing that we're seeking has to be spontaneous and freely given. Otherwise, it's not satisfying. What we wanted from them was, actual responsibility, not fear of punishment from us. We wanted actual generosity. We wanted actual caring, not just compliance to get out of trouble. So if you make them act like they feel these things, it will never feel like the thing you want. And by the way, it's very unlikely anyone can stick with a change that they made because they felt threatened by our demands. So finally, control shows up as helping people with problems that bother you about them. And this includes things like sending people videos and books that you want them to watch or read. People tell me that all the time. What do I do about my partner? I sent them all your videos. They refuse to watch. They won't face what they have. So the hope is always, like, if you just keep sending videos or books to somebody or telling them you really have to get therapy, then they will realize finally, oh, you know what, you're right. And they will fix it. And then everything will be great. But it almost never works that way. People who are resistant to your suggestion of what they need to do, if you keep trying to control them about it, they're more likely to push you away, shut the door. They may be even less likely to seek help when they otherwise might have. So if they haven't asked for help or suggestions, it's pretty easy for this type of help to slide into a veiled criticism too, which a veiled criticism is an attempt to control. And we talked about some of those. But if they say, you know what, I've got this problem. I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? Do you have any ideas? There's your opening. People seldom ask that, but that's your cue that it's okay to suggest something to them if you want to. Now, as somebody who's been offering, a program of healing for 30 years and developing it over the years, I have so much experience offering and having somebody not be interested, or offering and having somebody think they're interested, but then realizing they're not. Or I also had the experience trying to make people do what I believe would help them. And I can just tell you my own experience with that. I had a drug addict boyfriend, and I didn't know that getting into it. And then I found out, and I was kind of beating myself up that I should have known this was going on. But rather than leave, what I knew about the situation was definitely a get out of there situation. But my fear of abandonment, my fear of being alone, all that stuff was sort of controlling my mind and making me get deceived by myself. And I was like, I can fix this. I can make him be who I really need him to be so that this all retroactively works out. I was really afraid, like, what will other people think? And they're going to find out. And, eventually they did, of course. And there was nothing I could do to hide it because it got so bad, quite bad as it could possibly be. Some of you have heard the story. And very stigmatizing, lost a lot of friends, ended up, losing my work, a lot of things. It was very damaging to my life. It would have been so much better for my life if I had gotten out the minute I knew that there was this terrible secret and then gone to work on myself directly on why am I so unable to see these red flags. And that's why I make these videos for you. It's like, in retrospect, I can see step by step what happened there. And I try to teach the lessons I learned about how to stop doing that and start doing something that would put me on a good path, that did put me on a good path and allowed me to resolve that tendency of mine. So obviously, if people are not able to care for themselves or they're in danger, the rules are different. But you get to the point that it's not right to pressure people and then try to justify it as help. And it's just like, I'm just trying to help you. If you've ever had this done to you, it's awful. It's the repetition really that starts to make it unbearable, and it pushes people away. So people are remarkable and people are capable of making positive changes in their own lives. They don't always, but the capability is there without pressure on them. I used to always have tension in my body and my emotions because I had this agenda basically for everyone around me. I wanted them to like me or be close to me, like this close, not that close, not too far away. I would feel jealous. I would try to control how they behaved elsewhere or how close they got to my friends. I wanted them to respect me. I was in a panic state all the time. It was sort of crazy behavior, but when I was in the middle of it, I was throttled by CPTSD symptoms. I was going through a trauma storm. And I didn't have that growth that I ended up finding after that through my daily practice, through my spiritual life, to have any kind of trust that if I were to let go, anything could possibly be okay. So when I was controlling everybody like that, I did push everyone away. It did not accomplish what I wanted. It didn't keep anybody here. They just vanished. It was obnoxious. And it was so terrifying for me. I could feel them slipping away. And all I knew to do was to try to make them stop. And when I learned to let people be themselves and just see how I felt about them, I didn't expect it to work, but I was happily surprised. And I had this little saying to myself, I will just let go and let the chips fall where they may. And I knew that I might lose everyone. I already had, so I kind of had nothing to lose. But in my, occasional encounters with people, or sometimes trying to make new friends, or I started going to 12-step meetings for families of alcoholics, very helpful for this particular problem. I thought that my whole world would collapse if I stopped trying to control people. And that's not what happened. I had this incredible discovery that things kind of fell into a groove and they went along just fine, and that my control wasn't necessary. All I had to do was decide, like if somebody said, do you want to go on a group hike? I could go, do I? Like I have mixed feelings about that. And I could decide yes or no, and I didn't know. So I would use my daily practice techniques. I teach them like crazy here. If you don't know that yet, it's techniques that I use to kind of free my mind from CPTSD symptoms. I've now taught it to hundreds of thousands of people, and it's a big thing we do here. It's featured strongly in my book that's coming out in October, and you can learn it for free in a free course. It's short, it's easy. It's always linked in the description section below my videos. It's also on my website. But I was using my daily practice to release all this like panic and fear and anger and just like, why are people abandoning me? Why aren't people helping me? I'm going through so much, and I was going through a lot. And I had paper to bring that to. And then when I was around people, I just had more peace and less need to control, and less of that energy of like tension, like everybody don't trigger me and don't go away, but don't talk to me. And oh my gosh, it was an impossible set of demands. And when I let it go, guess what? People started to like me again. And it shows up from time to time in me. There's a tendency there. It's trauma driven for sure. It's an old kind of emotional flashback energy from when I was very small and no one was caring for me. And I was like, everybody, I need you. You have to take care of me. It's like in there, do I have to do everything? It's in there, but it goes dormant. It loses steam. It doesn't have energy to sort of activate with me when I use my daily practice regularly. But it shows up when I'm at a low ebb, it'll show up. I can hear it in my voice. My husband sure notices it. It's an unpleasant, like little space I get into. It's control energy. It looks like control. We would have to admit it's control, but my motivation in doing it is trying to prevent chaos inside. That's the motivation. So then I remember there is no, the chaos is going to happen if it's going to happen. I can just allow things to happen. I can really focus on my choices, my side of the street. What am I going to do in the next hour? And let other people do what they're going to do in the next hour and see what happens. Oh, it was marvelous. It was so relaxing. My whole body relaxed. I started having so much less inhibition and about expressing myself. For the longest time, right? That was like the marker of when I would never dance. I was like this person who wore black and smoked cigarettes, and everybody would dance, and they go, come on, dance with us. And I'd be like, no, I can't, no. It felt too out of control to me or too shameful or something. But, I grew up in this hippie commune and was dragged to these festivals and things. And there's just stuff that was triggering for me. So the triggers calmed down. Now I'm so much more flexible. I can hang out with a variety of people. I can dance if I want to. I can not dance. I don't smoke cigarettes. There's a boundary, but I actually don't care if other people do. It doesn't trigger me anymore. So it's possible to heal our own triggers and not have to control. Sometimes it takes time, but you can get to work on it. Most people with support, but no pressure, will in fact work on themselves eventually. Most, not all. Other people can't change, or they don't want to. And so you don't have to be around them, but if you want people in your life, the best thing you can do is to make them safe with you by allowing them to be themselves. Offer them love and acceptance. Quietly, you can still have some boundaries about them. You don't have to go, now I have a boundary. Don't even think of smoking around me. You can just be, I'm still sensitive when I'm around smoking. I want to do it. Would it be okay if when you smoke, you would go over there? If that doesn't work for you, I'll go over here. And if you don't like the arrangement with them, don't hang out with them. But allow people to know the information about what would support you, and then see what they do and see what you do. Just see what you do. You don't have to be hard and fast about things. You just have to take care of yourself. So I like boundaries. I like boundaries that can be done gracefully and kindly. But the biggest thing that you can have that keeps you safe is an inner clarity about what kinds of situations or dynamics would be your cue to step back or step away from a situation or a person. That's a boundary. It's that inner clarity. There's no sense of continuously pressuring other people to change and just yelling and yelling and yelling. When you are a loving and safe presence for people who struggle, you're more trustworthy and you're more likely to be the person they come to on the day that they want to say, hey, I need some help. Could you give me some suggestions? And there you will be with all your suggestions that you thought of in the old days when they were always on your mind, ready to go. So if you think that abuse and neglect in your own childhood may have affected you in the way that I'm talking about and the way you connect with people, maybe through being controlling or being attracted to controlling people, I have a quiz you can take right here. It's a free download, and I will see you very soon.